I have a stack of Intel Z590 motherboards all ready for the Rocket Lake launch at the end of the month. What I do not yet have is an NZXT Z590 board. I do, however, have this Z490 board that's been here for an embarrassing length of time, and if I don't get on and do something with it basically now, then its time will have passed. You'll be crying out for Z590. So I think the smart move is to take this Z490 board and an H710i case, a C750 power supply, and an NZXT Kraken liquid cooler, and do a build. And oh looky here, they sent me an accessory. Yep, that's very smart. I like it. Let's start by getting down to brass tacks with the NZXT N7 Z490 motherboard. You may recall with the Z390, which was NZXT's first motherboard, it was an ECS with sort of tarted up bodywork on it and decking and cladding, call it what you will. These panels here, which snap on and snap off to reveal the M.2s and expansion slots. This is actually an ASRock board, and it is a Steel Legend Z490 from ASRock. If you look closely, you will see certain points of similarity. So it's a cosmetic makeover. However, I understand the BIOS has also been changed significantly. The BIOS in the NZXT is by ASRock, but it is different to ASRock's regular BIOS. I should look at that with some interest. You pay about £180 for the Steel Legend from ASRock. You pay about £222.30 for the NZXT, so £40–50 uplift. With the Z390, they charged a monumental surcharge and got clattered for that. So the Z490, there is a differential, but you're paying less of a differential. Z590, I believe they're going to be sticking with ASRock as the OEM. No idea about the spec or which board it's going to be based on. No idea about pricing. So what do we have with this N7 Z490? So we pop out these two covers. We take out some screws and remove all this decking, which is purely cosmetic, and that reveals the chipset heatsink, which is held on with a couple of screws, thermal pad, fairly messy thermal pad, but a thermal pad on the chipset, and the VRM heatsink held down with 4 more screws. Comes away. And if we look at that in profile, so extruded in 2 sections and then joined together. Not thin, does have some surface area, has a reasonable amount of bulk. The 2 parts screwed together there. And that reveals, it's actually a really lightweight PCB. So we've got Dr. Moss VRMs, dual channel, dual PCI Express x16 Wi-Fi card, all the obvious bits and pieces really. Reasonable number of fan headers. He says 3 USB 2s at the bottom. I'm not mad keen on this thing of having fan headers at the top and the bottom. I'm not even seeing a fan header at first glance in this vicinity for the rear fan. Fan headers don't appear to be brilliantly located, but there's plenty of them. Laid down USB 3, laid down SATA, and then we've got a 4+2 EPS at the top. I/O has an HDMI, no display port. We've got a variety of USB, we've got a fair amount of space, we've got the Wi-Fi antenna point. So in terms of function, that looks like a fairly mundane and average board, which for the money is pretty much what you expect. So do you think those are worth 40 quid? We shall see. I'm using a WD Blue SSD, that's a 1 TB, putting that in the top M.2 slot. And then that's going to be covered. Actually, that's a bit peculiar thinking about it. So we've got an M.2 that is going to be under a cosmetic cover, but it doesn't have a heatsink on it. Processor is an Intel 10700KF, so that means it does not have a graphics core. Et voila. And memory, G.Skill Trident Z Royal. I'm trying this 4000 MHz memory. It's C17. First time out for this RAM for me. What do we think? Do we like the combination of gold and white? Certainly quite sporty. CPU cooler is going to be this NZXT Kraken Z53, which is a 240mm AIO from Acetec. It has this LCD on the pump body. Looking forward to seeing what that does. It works with NZXT CAM software, so fingers crossed that goes well. Before I get to the case, it makes sense to install the back plate and the standoffs on the motherboard, just to make life easy. H710i Case, £170, and that's because it contains a smart device. I'll come to that at some point. Let's have a peel of side panel. I think that's all the plastic. Don't think there's any on the interface. Oh, I see. So we've got a caution sticker under the plastic. And then we're inside, so it's obviously a black and white case. Let's take off the back panel. Pop button. Away it comes. Comment under one of James's videos recently that Leo and James, and they pull off panels, comment no sound deadening material. Well, there isn't, is there? Relatively sturdy, but nonetheless, it's not going to keep a lot of noise in. Oh, goodness me. Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 12 pegs supporting that. That's unusual. And then that front filter. Oh, that's a screw that was on that magnet, which does not appear to be missing from anything. I don't know what to say. Okay, well that filter, right, that makes sense. That filter wasn't in correctly. Magnetic dust filter, pull off front panel, extra screw, don't know what's going on there. 3x120 NZXT fans, and loads of cabling on the back panel. Runs through that channel. And behind this white cable management plate, there we have the smart device, which does clever stuff. Need to read up on it. I'm trusting at the very least it does fan control, and that is controlled by CAM software. That's the I part of the H710i. Couple of SSD sleds, perforated power supply shroud around the back, couple of 2.5, 3.5 inch drive bays, box of accessories, plenty of cable guides, 2 more SSD mounts. That's an awful lot of drive bays, and we've got a power supply plate that can come off. Power supply goes in from the rear. The top panel is retained in the same way as the front, i.e. it's got push pins. Wow, I mean, I don't know, there have to be more elegant ways of doing it than that. And that opens up the top so you can install your cooling in the roof, or indeed fans, so liquid cooler or fans. And you can see there the top of this cable guide, and you can see it's got RGB of some sort, and there we have that smart device. Front I/O while we're here, 1 Type-C, 2 USB Type-A's, and an audio jack. We've got a removable radiator rack in the roof, retained by 4 screws. And actually when it's pulled apart, frankly that is more perforations than metal practically. It looks like a reasonable design. 170 quid. That smart device is going to have to do some decent work. I've removed 3 screws, and now the cable bar can be popped loose to reveal that LED lighting and also the smart device. C750 power supply, rated at 750 watts as you'd expect, and it's gold. Fully modular. I don't know who the OEM is. We have a jaunty pack of cables. individual strand licorice with some sleeving to tidy them up a bit. And that is £115. Mind you, in this day and age, the main thing is it's a power supply I've actually got in my hands. What with the big shortage and so on, beggars can't be choosers. In fairness, in terms of styling, that perforated casing ties in with the perforated power supply. So they've done a reasonable job on that front. I think it's time to put the power supply and the motherboard in the chassis. Installing the motherboard was something of a pain because the screw holes in the board are all recessed in that decking furniture, call it what you will. So that wasn't much fun. Also, the power supply has a single EPS cable, so I'm using the 8-pin, but I can't use the 4-pin. I'm not concerned about that, but it might be a limitation for some people. The cable management panel on this side, feeding cables around it, slightly awkward, and I don't think that 24-pin looks particularly appealing. Around the back of the case, all these cable management channels, they work very well. It's a bit fiddly, you have to put something in place, get the strap around it, move things around. But so far, I think that side of it is looking pretty successful, and there's definitely enough space for everything. However, I am going to say that routing cables to the headers at the bottom of the board, tight. And considering this is an NZXT board in an NZXT case, they might have thought about how much space you actually require to gain access to those headers. Next up, it's the Kraken cooler, and as I have 3 fans at the front, common sense says I put the 240 rad in the roof. The radiator rack's a bit peculiar. If you're mounting a 140 or 280 cooler, you'd put the screws there and there. However, a 120, you're going here, and you'll note these cutouts, which means you have to put the rad, in this case 240, either here or here. Clearly a 360 is going to go where it's going to go. If I put the cooler to the rear of the case, I'm going to have the hoses interfering with the rear fan, so I've moved the cooler to the front of the rack. I've got all the cabling and so on plugged in, which is something of a mess, but we drop it in place, and that's not dropping down because this fan here is interfering with the decking on the motherboard, essentially the surround on the top VRM cooler. I've moved the fans to pull rather than push, which means the screws are coming in from the top rather than the bottom, so we have no screw heads on this side of the rad. Does that do the trick? The rad, I've got a fan cable that's slightly in the way, but no, I'm still lacking clearance. So I think the next thing to try is to put the fans above the rack so I can move everything up by the thickness of the fans, and provided the fans can fit above the rack and the top cover can go on, then I'll be good. I've now got plenty of space between the radiator and the motherboard. Question is, can I put my top panel in place? Honestly don't know. I'm going to snap it down and see what happens. Okay, well that seems to work. So secure the rack. Hang on, I'm going to get this blooming thing off now. Oh god. So nip up the screws, secure the rack, and then connect all this mess. I've just walked around this side of the build and realised having the cooler there with the hoses going straight across the middle of the CPU probably won't work and looks absolutely terrible. So I'm now going to have to try and shift the rad backwards. God blimey. Okay, that's the cooler installed and it looks reasonably tidy. However, I've had to move it forward by about yay much from the position that the mounting holes allow, and that means it's hanging on 4 screws rather than 8, 2 per fan. So I'm not best pleased about that. If I was to take a guess, I would have to question whether anybody at NZXT actually installed this combo of components in a system. The particular issue being the hardware around the top of the motherboard. The case actually has a decent amount of space. The cooler is entirely conventional apart from the extra bits of cabling going on to do with RGB and fan control and such like. It's the motherboard that's caused me issues. And now it's time for a graphics card. Sapphire RX 6800 XT. And when you consider the enormous amount of space in front of the graphics card, you have to think that possibly that is the logical place for the cooler. In which case, and it's just a thought, why don't they put those fans in the roof, leave the front open ready for a liquid cooler. Et voila! And the cabling around the back, that extraneous connector there is for hooking in accessory RGB strips should you buy them from NZXT. So, time to fire the system up. I'm not at all sure the BIOS is very interesting. We identify the parts correctly, XMP, boot drive, we've got a single PWM device connected, which is the AIO pump, because the fans are all connected to the smart device. And then if we go into advanced mode, we can see, apart from the purple, it's a conventional BIOS. So I don't know quite what I was expecting or hoping for, but whatever it is, it's all normal. And there we go, that's the PC finished. We've got NZXT's CAM software running, which is telling us what's going on with the system. Cooling's in silent mode, but the LCD display on the pump body of the Z53 makes it crystal clear what the CPU is doing. That's the PC finished, and to my mind it's very neat and tidy. While this isn't a review, I suppose really 4 reviews, there are 4 NZXT products here, I'm going to offer a couple of points of view because after all I've been at this for a while now, so why not? The case, the H710i, it's relatively expensive at £170 here in the UK. It clearly majors on the aesthetic side of things. It's not got mesh at the front, but it is heavily perforated and it appears to flow air reasonably well, but it's about the look. It's a reasonable size of case. There's a decent amount of room above the motherboard. The front has a huge amount of space, and this cable bar is a strange thing. I missed the point that when I was putting this together, actually there's an LED strip in the roof of the case as well as around the back of that cable bar, but I'm not entirely clear what this is about. It is fairly obvious that a radiator should go at the front. Might involve moving the front fans around, but whatever, that's a small point. Cable management around the back is really good. It's a little fiddly to kind of get everything tied down tight. That's something you do once during a build realistically, and perhaps once if you do a major upgrade. So that's not a problem. The cable management, I would say, is a great success. Number of drive bays is really surprising. We've got SSD sleds just everywhere, plus the regular drive bays, plus obviously M.2 capacity. So no arguments there whatsoever. I don't much like the way the front and top panels pull off with a violent bang, and then when you put them back you have to lean on them. Not mad keen on that. It just seems completely over the top. Having said that, the panels are secure and they're held in place tightly. So where you've got this black and white contrast going on, it's neat. And I suspect that was NZXT's prime focus all along the way. So in that sense, a success. The smart device, which is a combined fan hub and RGB control unit, seems to work well enough. It's a bit strange seeing in their CAM software one fan only because they're all daisy chained together, but it works well enough, so happy. What else? Power supply. I did some checking. I believe the OEM for the power supply is Seasonic. It appears to be a Focus Gold under a different guise, and the pricing is exactly the same as Seasonic's. So what can you say? Seasonic Focus, it wins awards left, right and centre with Kit Guru. If this is the same PSU at the same money, fine. It just looks different to the regular Seasonic. Now bear in mind, this is the Z490, the 590 is coming. We don't know yet about the features and such like. Again, it's about the aesthetics. You're paying an extra 40 quid to get a board that looks like that, and I personally think the shrouding around the VRM covers is just over the top. It makes the top of the case too busy, and it yields no benefits. It's purely for the look of it. So that was the biggest problem I had with getting the board in the case with the cooler up there. I could have obviously moved the cooler to the front, but that shrouding, nah. I'm hoping the 590 is slightly more intelligent. The cover over the M.2 slot that is a cover rather than a heatsink, that's just a bad idea. Again, I hope to goodness that the Z590 is different, so we're not going to pass judgment. And then the Kraken cooler. When I looked up the Kraken Z53 before I started this, I found it on sale in the UK at one outlet for £210 and I nearly fell over. Corsair's Elite 240 is 150 and Corsair, as we know, frankly charges too much. So 150 I thought was the ceiling, 210 was like, you've got to be kidding me. I've looked around again and found actually elsewhere it's 180. Still a lot of money. The plain fans on the cooler are unimpressive. I've got it in pull, so you can't even see the fans. It doesn't matter. I have to say, this I like a great deal. That's good. As to whether you pay a premium for it, matter of choice. And that is that. I'm done. I'm now going to go away and do a load of benchmarking of Intel Rocket Lake.